On this episode, we talk about something good that's growing in Kansas. And no, I'm not talking about the wheat. That's coming up. Hello and welcome to Church and Maine, a podcast for people interested in the intersection of faith, politics, and culture. I'm Dennis Sanders, your host. Today I'm talking with the Reverend Travis Smith McKee, the Associate Regional Minister for Transformation Ministries and New Church for the Kansas region of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. In this podcast, we're going to talk about the new ministries that are taking place in Kansas, what this can mean for the denomination, which also happens to be my denomination, and for mainline Protestantism in general. A little bit about Travis. He started with the Kansas region in 2005 as a summer camp intern and has served in churches in both the Kansas and greater Kansas City regions. He has most recently served as an interim pastor at Galva Christian Church and as regional disciples youth coordinator. Travis has a passion for empowering congregations to reach out to their communities and finding expansion to the witness of God's grace. He lives in Wichita with his wife, the Reverend Travis Smith McKee, and their daughter, Lucy. So let's listen in to this discussion that I had with Travis on new and revitalizing ministries in the region of Kansas. Travis, thank you for taking the time to chat this afternoon.
Yeah, glad to be with you.
Cool. I want to actually start to get a little bit of a background about you, where you grew up, your faith journey, and kind of go from there.
Yeah. So I'm from Tulsa, Oklahoma, born and raised. My family's from Tulsa, and I grew up. I've been going to church since I was 3 weeks old. As soon as I got out of the hospital, my mom started taking me to my grandma's church, and just very involved there. Um, she moved me to me and my sister. We were some of the only kids at my grandma's church, and so instead of us crawling under the pews every Sunday morning, we went to a church that had more youth programming. Um, but they had a minister for 32 years, and he retired, and there was no interim. There was no right. Yeah, I'm looking at. Trust me, this is a fun part of the story. No interim, and the called minister in the '90s, the new called minister, dared to do such strange things as start a praise team, praise band, and not preach from behind the pulpit, and just wear a tie, no robe, and things like that. And it was such a strange time, and the church ended up splitting because of that. What that taught me in my early faith life is that there was a lot of dealing with people. People, their expectations, their hopes, and my family has stayed with that church until till I moved, and then till we moved my parents up here to Wichita. Um, I went off to college, and I met a disciples chaplain at a Presbyterian college who was so excited to see me a disciple. And I didn't quite know what that meant back then, but I learned how how it was to be ecumenical in such a diverse world, what it was to be interfaith. And so Kathleen Fannin was the chaplain there at Monmouth College. And then I did a traveling music ministry. Um, I took a year off from college and did a traveling music ministry with a primarily Lutheran organization. Somehow, I had not considered it. Even though I was very involved with campus ministry, I took a year off to do that traveling ministry, and church has been such an important part of my life. It took until I was graduating college to consider going into ministry. And I got a call to come be an intern out here in Kansas. I spent a summer working at the church camp doing dishes. We There was the first year that it went from being a Boy Scout camp to a church camp, and so we had a lot of fun maintenance surprises and things like that. And at the end of that summer, up on the hill, I can tell you exactly where it was and what was going on, but I got my undeniable call to ministry.
Hmm.
So I moved back to Tulsa for just a little bit, used my college degree to teach music for a little bit, but I also started seminary. And then in 2008, I went into full-time ministry. I've primarily been in Kansas, did 6 years in Kansas City. My wife and I met, you know, right before then and got married. And then we went to Kansas City and were co-pastors out there. We did that for 6 years, which is a really fun way to. It worked really well in our marriage.
Yeah.
She's also an ordained pastor, and you know, our gifts and skills really worked quite well together in that setting. But she ended up pursuing a call to chaplaincy, and I ended up pursuing a call to solo pastoring for a little bit, and came back here to Wichita area and served a church. I started 10 weeks before COVID started. Um, that felt like a decade. And then I served for just a couple of years there, and then went on to interim ministry. And now I am serving as associate regional minister for Transformational Ministries here with the Christian Church in Kansas.
So how did you end up in that position of the associate for transformational ministry?
Um, well, I mean, personally, I've, I share that whole, growing up in church and being so involved in everything that it was kind of like, oh, have you considered going into ministry? In the same way, I found myself involved in new church. Those 6 years in Kansas City were really formative. I got to work with a lot of people who have been involved with new churches who had a lot of that passion. And for me, I also have that push to see church done well. And part of, I say that because and again, growing up in a church that didn't do things well, it really put us back quite a bit. When we see church done well, with uh, good practices, but also well, when we see it done with good practices, what we're able to see is a church that is freed up to be creative, a church that is able to you know try to reach people in ways that haven't been done in their context yet. Um, Church that's able to change and grow throughout there. So it's really I found myself drawn to this because I've been involved. I've been with this stuff, but also I've spent so much time in this Kansas region that I know our congregations, I know our people, and it was one of those like, what would happen if we tried it here? What would happen if we tried experiments and working together in unique ways, and um it being able to take that familiarity with Kansas and the drive that I have for what could be next in church. I went for it. I applied, and the folks agreed, and so we saw a good partnership, and been doing that for a year and a half now.
What is the history of new church in the Kansas region and and also congregational revitalization? Because it sounds like this is something that is fairly a recent position. And as we
It
were
is.
talking, it seems like, let's just say the record hasn't been great. And I also know that from my own history in my own region of the upper Midwest, as we were just talking about before the podcast. But, what were the steps that led to kind of the creation of your position?
Yeah. So disciples are an interesting denomination. The way that I describe the Kansas region and a lot of how our church is formed is when there was a town square being built back in the 1800s, we made sure we were there. The timing of the history of our country with westward expansion and things like that, um, we that was also right around the time that the disciples were really moving, and so the Kansas region really was a prime for success during this time because the state of Kansas is forming, because so many cities are forming, or towns, or whatever you want to call them, but so we had so many small town churches throughout the state. We have 75 now, but we have had many more over the decades and century plus. Um, but it's hard to start a new church in a place that we are not already there. Um, if I'm working with a congregation that has a town population of 3 or 4 thousand people, I'm not going to start a new church there. We're gonna work with the existing congregation. Um, you know, and we couple that with the way that the disciples as a whole have been working. So, like I said, I worked in Kansas City, which, yes, any of our non-disciples folks listening, Kansas is its own region. Kansas City is its own region. It's about the same number of churches, but one has 5 counties and one is the rest of the state. So, anyway, during my time up there, I got to work with Jose Martinez, who's now in charge of our new church ministries for the denomination. Terrell McTire, who had been in that role before, Casey Sigmund, who has that experience, but is also a preaching professor at St. Paul, and Deleslin Kennebrew, when we ended up calling her to be the regional minister for New Church. What we saw within that is a freeing up of our, in Kansas City, there were some um, endowments and some other funds that had been set aside for New Church specifically, but also the Pentecost offering. And we really saw a focused effort as to what it looks like to actually use that money, not set it aside for if and when, but to really make big pushes for how we could do that well. So then I moved back to Kansas and we start having that conversation here too. There's a recognition that our Kansas churches have been so faithful in their giving to the Pentecost offering. They would love to see new churches, but in our context, it hasn't always come to fruition. So we had 20 years of the Pentecost offering ready to go, which is a really freeing space to say, you've got money to try things. How how are you going to do that? And so we started working with New Church Ministries to come up with some plans, as well as with the Kansas City region in ways that we had done that before. And so that was the start of it. The way that we did this for Kansas is also recognizing that our New Church Ministries have been, for the full denomination, have been shifting from not just brand new congregations that have never existed before, but what does it mean to take new church strategies and apply them within our existing context, especially since COVID. My goodness. Like, I make the joke that the 2 years of the height of COVID felt like a decade. That's not, it's not far from the truth. Wherever you were at the beginning of, March of 2020, over that 2 years, it kind of felt like 10 years of life experience crammed into that. And so our minister for New Church Ministries on the denominational level, Jose Martinez, has said, we're all New Church now. We're all taking that to heart. And so instead of thinking that the only thing we can do is start a brand new congregation in a brand new context, we said, what if we also are working with congregations who have struggled for a while, who are looking to um, try new things within their existing contexts, who are wanting to, really bring in such an influx of newer folks, people who have not been involved with the congregation before, that it feels like a new church. And so it's been great because we get to expand, but the we get to expand the scope of how we're involved in this, while also recognizing the assets of people, of buildings, of other things that give us a good head start, and we can see, all right, there are possibilities. There's a future here as well.
So it's kind of an interesting concept, and in talking about new church, because it's not just about actual physical new churches, which has actually been part of the plan of disciples over the last,
Yeah,
let's say,
and I'll
50,
I'll
60
get
years.
into, we'll
Yeah.
talk about the new congregations that we have,
Mhm.
what it looks like. But yeah, go ahead
But
with
it
your
also
question.
seems to be that you are bringing in those kind of new church principles of bringing in new things to existing congregations. Because I think that there has been sometimes, I think has always been a kind of a tension between existing congregations and new congregations. And
Yeah.
sometimes existing congregations feel left out, um, of that. So it's how do you balance both? And it seems like, from what it sounds like, the strategy that you're doing is trying to really please both is not the right word, but you're trying to actually understand and respond to both impulses, instead of
Yeah.
trying to focus on one and not focus on much on the other, which sometimes has been the case.
So often, regional ministry is, especially within our context, we are not the big bosses,
Mhm.
in fact, one of my pastoral friends really loves to give me a hard time every time I give him a call. He answers the phone, yes, your holiness, may I kiss your ring, your holiness. He's making a joke. We don't have that hierarchical structure. There are very few times that we come in as regional staff with, like, okay, this is what you have to do and how you have to do it. But also, when we have 75 congregations throughout our state, that's a lot to work with. When you have one person, which some regions are going down to one regional minister for that many congregations, you cannot visit each of those on a Sunday morning without taking at least 2 years to do that. Then, if you want to have your own home personal church to be rooted in and to really have your own faith community, you as an individual are just really struggling to be able to provide that support. We have a staff of two regional ministers doing that work right there. Our senior and our associate there, but then also myself as associate regional minister, where I can come in and I can do work with a congregation for multiple weeks at a time. Like, I can. One of the congregations that I'm working with right now, I've been working with for over 6 months. And I've been there multiple times on Sundays. I've been there multiple meetings and things like that, because I'm able to give that concentrated attention that those congregations are needing. They've got, they're not without. They can do many things, but especially for this congregation that I'm thinking of right now, it's been helping them to see they do have abilities. They do have a future because after a string of a few pastors that just it hasn't worked out, after disappointing trends throughout there, they lost a bit of just a bit of energy and a bit of self confidence. And so I've been doing a lot of work with them on, yeah, but here's what you do have. When we talk about mission, these are the things that you'd like to see happening, and you have ways to achieve that. Um, Sometimes regional ministers don't get to spend as much time with that, and so that is my favorite part of the job is that I really get to spend concentrated time with congregations to help them really live into how are they living out the gospel within their context.
And I should add for people who aren't disciple, the Pentecost offering is the offering that's geared towards new church ministry. Um, and I have to bring that up because, of course,
Yeah.
speaking to a fellow disciple, you're getting into kind of your
we do
our
we
little
do
world.
we do offerings throughout the year, and they go to specific ministry. There's special ministry mission. Sorry, they are special offerings that go to various ministries of the church. And so the offering that we take around Pentecost time is focused on seeing new life coming in the church. And so that's why, we call it the Pentecost offering, for two reasons there. It is given with the hope of seeing new life within the church.
So, how much pastoral care is involved in congregational revitalization? Because it seems like in what you're alluding to is a lot of really spending time with the people, probably even with the pastor, and especially the people as you've described it, because they've gone through a lot. Maybe they've gone through cases where they've either had a lot of people but lost a lot of people, and just
Oh yeah.
there just seems to be a lot. And I don't think we always think about that aspect of revitalizing existing congregations.
Grief is a real thing. I would obfuscate it, except for it's true for so many congregations I've been working with lately that they are losing a longtime pastor or just a well-loved pastor, and they are feeling like, oh my goodness, life is over. Or there's a few folks that are vocal with their grief. There's also several people who are looking at situations like that as, oh, we have a chance to try something new. Um, and, a congregation is not a monolith. You can't say everybody is this one way. And so you take aspects of, pastoral care, like you said, you want to be able to hear and hold people's grief because it's a hard space to be in. You also take a bit of coaching in that you're listening for what it is that they're offering. What are some of the solutions that are already present within those people who are gathered? You're also taking in just like I said, that cheerleader mentality, but it's that daring to have pastoral hope that there is new life out of what has seemed to be not much. Um, a lot of folks say it in this way that Jesus got started with 12 people. The Jesus movement got started with 12 people. And if we can go from 12 people to a movement that has gone all over the world, has changed countless lives, what could 12 people gathered in your congregation do? And sometimes you've got the disciples who are still fighting at each other's throats over various things, disagreeing on which way you got to go. And so that pastoral care really is taking time to get to know people, taking time to listen to where they're at, and and I would say the other part that's really important is storytelling. We've got to be able to share what it is that our congregations are doing. And sometimes, we hear about a congregation who is doing something that's normal for them. In this town, we host this kind of ministry and it's normal for us. We've been doing it for 20 years. And if they've been doing it for 20 years, they may not be sharing it very often because it's typical for them. But a congregation in another town may hear, oh, wait, you had some extra Sunday school rooms and you started hosting a clothes closet there. Oh, that's a really good idea for how we could use some of the extra space that we have. Or, you've been able to look at partnerships with other nonprofits or, other groups or other ministries, and you've seen this sort of thing come together. When we share those kinds of stories, something that I've said previously is that you're taking language, you're using words, you're using stories, and you're seeing what's possible. And so now you're talking about, oh, when we're talking about what is possible with our future, when we're talking about what it is that we want to showcase in our values, we've seen others doing it this way. It doesn't have to feel brand new. It can feel like, hey, we're connecting with others and seeing that shared throughout our region.
What are some of the stories that you've witnessed over the last few years of congregations as they are kind of going through that process of figuring out their next steps and maybe grieving some of their past?
Yeah. Um, so goodness, it is amazing to see what congregations really truly hold within them. Most congregations will have somebody who is their historian,
Hmm.
or either formally or informally, their historian. They will know some of those deep things that have been part of their story. I worked with a congregation that had ministers for about 2 to 3 years, their entire existence, and we're talking they just celebrated 150 years. And for most of that time, ministers were there for 2, 3 years tops. There were two exceptions. One person was there for 5 years, left, and came back for another 5 years. And then their last pastor had been there for 20 years. They had they had atrophied in a lot of ways. That muscle that they had been used to of congregational leadership and people, jumping forward with new ideas, taking that ownership within the congregation. And when their minister was there for 20 years, of course, that minister got to know people really well and was well loved. But afterwards, they kind of stumbled and struggled to figure out what could be next. And so they started looking around and realizing now this is a small town. It's so small, there are exactly two churches in the town. That's it. They share it's a town of 900. Now it's just outside of a town with a bigger population. It's not far from there, but they share their school with another place as well. So I mean, it's definitely something that really can happen within small towns. But people were, there were a lot of people with families, children that were still, part of the community and active going on there. And so they started recognizing, some of the young adults that had grown up in the church started going, well, we want to have a Sunday school for our kids, but we want to invite our friends to bring their kids too. And
Hmm.
so they started having Sunday school for their kids again. They hadn't for several years, and they started doing it. But instead of, okay, the education team has approved it, the budget is here, and XYZ things, folks started making donations. Here's some paint to help, refresh the room. Here's somebody who, wants to put a TV in there so we can watch a video. Let's get, some comfortable pillows and cushions for the kids to sit on for story time and stuff like that. And they turned one of the classrooms from that boring drab color behind me, that's almost, somewhere between white and sky blue. They turned it from that into a beautiful, colorful room that people were able to come and be a part of. And those parents were able to take leadership and take ownership. So many congregations, though, start from, oh, we've got to get permission to do all this first. And this congregation started recognizing, actually, we could just do this. We could, and they've been filling in, details. They've been trying to get some consistency since then, but it's been really neat to see how they've been working together. And so they now have a not just Sunday, but they have a Wednesday gathering for their elementary kids. That has a meal, has more lessons, and they have about 30 kids that will come out for that, or a pool of 30 kids that will come out and be involved with it. Rewind about 3 years ago, there were not 30 kids coming.
Mm,
So that's kind of the joy that they've been able to share.
mm,
I'm trying to think another congregation has, struggled. Pastor after pastor has come in, and they have been there for just a couple of years at a time. Especially during the COVID time, they thought their pastor was going to stay there a little bit longer, but he ended up retiring. I mean, you can get into all the details of it. They just felt real low on themselves. What they started naming their mission of they want to be involved in the community. They want to see how they can find partnerships that can work right there. They miss their youth program. Their youth program used to be a lot bigger. I mean, just real big, real happening, real exciting, and with so much internal struggle, it just has fallen out. So this is a congregation that has resources, and they started recognizing, wait, this endowment has money that we can just spend without really having to ask too many questions. But then it's also a pretty big enough endowment. Thank God for those faithful people throughout the years, because they have given that money to make sure that the future of the church can happen. And so now that they recognize their mission, they're able to free up some money there. And they're able to free up some money. This was a church that got hit by a tornado about 25 years ago. Um, and their old space was really landlocked. They didn't even have really a yard to play in the front of the church. And so they bought on the edge of town more space than they ever needed. And they're starting to recognize maybe we could free up some of those resources. They're asking those kinds of questions, but they really are asking it not as in, can we do this in survival? They're asking it from a mission standpoint first, of here's who we want to reach, the new houses that are being built in this area, the neighborhood across the street from us. We want to reach out to those folks, and we want to see them enjoying the church, not just coming on Sunday mornings, but being neighbors, having ice cream every once in a while, just things like that can come around there. And so they're starting to look for a pastor that can help them in achieving those goals. Not
mhm,
just somebody who will come in on Sunday morning and fill that pulpit. All right, hey, we don't have to ask that question. No, they want somebody who will come in to help them achieve goals. And so they're interviewing candidates right now. But when they took the plan to their congregation, this is they took the plan, they were there, they were excited about it. And that day, one individual came up and said, here's another $10,000 to make sure that we can call a minister full time. Like, oh, I love it. I love it when, here you have a that wasn't even me getting up there and, sales pitching or anything like that. That was the congregation expressing their mission so purposefully that people heard it, they got it, and the whole group started chipping in too. So I'm excited to see where that one's going to go. I'm excited to share their story as it comes further.
mm. How important do you think it is for there to be, as I think you said this earlier, cheerleaders for congregations in ministry? Because I think sometimes a lot of congregations these days, I don't think they always have people there that can tell them that, God's not done with them yet. And it can feel really dejected. I mean, obviously, I talked earlier about pastoral care, but also someone that can cheer them on.
Yeah, it's amazing how much energy it takes. I'm definitely an introvert. Uh, so I save it up for when I'm going to the congregations, because the whole time I'm there, I am just talking with folks. I'm listening with them, but I'm also helping to reframe some of those, the down on their luck, language that's going on, and helping them to see, oh wait, but this is also a possibility, or I really like this area that you have over here. Tell me more about why you've got that, and bringing that in together to be a cheerleader for a congregation. I mean, it can take a lot because they have just felt alone. Now I was not in regional ministry before COVID, so I don't know that it was entirely like this, but I could see that if you've gone through that kind of time period where it's like, oh man, we've been trying, but it just hasn't been working, and especially highlighting that during the height of COVID, where oh, we can't even meet in person. Oh, that weighed hard on people. And so it's reminding them that, yeah, even though these things have gone on, God is faithful during it.
Hmm.
You are not done. Um, you are people who, certainly had ups and downs, but now, you have an opportunity. And it, like I said, it just takes so much energy and effort to do that, because you're facing some of those folks who have been so, um, I want to say hurt, but I also don't want to say hurt. They've, it's those expectations and disappointments. In the same realm, you have people at those congregations who are excited to try something new. You have people who have been waiting for someone to give permission for them to feel good about church. And people do feel good about their church. Obviously, they're coming every week. Most of the folks that I'm dealing with, they're there every week. Okay, so where's the permission giving to say, yeah, we can try new things, or we can feel excited about what's going on? That, that's an exciting thing. And, I think so often, again, I don't know if you're a fan of the Wire, but like for at least three of those seasons, they use the tagline "trying to do more with less." That feels like what we've had to do. You go back 30 years in regional ministry, and our staffs were filled. We had more people all the time. But as times have changed, as church has changed, we've gone with that, trying to do more with less. And I'm excited that we've recognized our abilities. We've recognized, yeah, we have money within the Pentecost offering. We have other monies that have been donated. And instead of saying like, we're going to wait for a rainy day, let's say, let's dance in the rain right now. Let's do this, because if not now, when? If we're not going to be trying this stuff, when are we waiting for? Now is that time to really push forward with it. With our resources, with our assets, with what God has blessed us with, and with what faithful people have blessed us with.
So we talked about congregational revitalization. So the other side of that is new churches.
Yeah.
What examples have there been of new congregations out there?
Let me tell you, we have two new churches in Kansas. That is not a statement that we've been able to say for a very long time. um, we have seen two new churches come into place. One is we did have a church in well, and you know what? I'm gonna brag about them. We had a church in Lawrence that did end up leaving the denomination.
Mhm.
Folks can leave the denomination over ideology, various things like that, sure. But Lawrence, Kansas is kind of the blue dot of Kansas, if you will, um, because it's a college town. The University of Kansas is there. Um, we steal a phrase from Texas and we say keep Lawrence weird up there, and what we had a pastor who was living in the area and has connections within the area and wanted to capitalize on that and say, okay, I you know how can she bring about what's going on in the community, but also being able to truly name a supportive and experimental and just truly loving congregation. That had been a hope of hers for many years. Um, and so, again, permission giving. We finally have opened that up. And so we've seen that. So Tiffany Detain is our pastor of the Fringe, as Jesus reached people on the fringe. And so that's been going for a little under a year. They've been meeting. Um, they meet at the Ecumenical Campus Ministry of the campus. Now, go back to the 50s and 60s when ecumenical movement was going strong, and there's 7 or 8 churches that are listed on the outside of that building, and I don't know if any of them are still active with the ecumenical campus ministry. Um, it's been a place they have punk rock shows, and I mean I'm talking like real punk rock shows, like um, just you see the fringes of politics and various things like that gathering there too. They have vegan lunches. They have all these other sort of things at the Ecumenical Campus Ministry. They just call it the ECM because I don't know if those words meant anything for so long in practice. And now the Fringe is meeting there for their gatherings, but also they're doing lunch and just celebrating. And, it's exciting because Tiffany and their group is being a part of that community. Um, they don't own property. I guarantee you, we will not see them in a, uh, giant building or a sanctuary that seats 400 anytime soon. They're doing intentional church, which looks more relational, which looks like valuing those who have not been welcomed or met. Their needs have not been met by traditional church, and it's really seeing. I'm excited about how they are doing that outreach right there. There's no place like it in Lawrence. There's no place like it in most of Kansas. I can guarantee you that. And so, what I've been really thankful for, we talked about how new church and existing churches can partner together. We've seen that happening. Existing churches are partnering with the Fringe, both learning from the focus that they have, but also we're seeing partnerships where people are involved, both in their home church and in the Fringe, providing music or coming and just celebrating and worship with them. It's really a neat thing that's going on there. We've got another church. Dennis, I tell you, this is going to be a strange story. So buckle up here, but I'm okay with it. They started in Indianapolis. Now, you can see a pastor moving from one town to another, right? What about a church moving from one town to another? And that's what we were met with, is that this church moved from Indianapolis to Independence, Kansas. Yes, the bustling metropolis of Independence, Kansas, right? Yeah, of course. They're down in the southeast part of the state, and they had some connections with some people who had some land that they have been able to help repurpose and are using it for community gardening. This congregation started with an eco theology. They started with many of the same hopes and goals that the Fringe had of reaching people who are not typically served by a traditional church, but really having a focus of how are they serving within their community. And so when this opportunity comes out, several states away, they take it. But this congregation got started around the time of COVID, and so they'd already been used to meeting online. Now they still have a group of people who are getting together and doing mission in Indianapolis, but then they're also doing stuff in Kansas. And they
Hmm.
also have a gathering online. And so I'm actually going there tomorrow morning as we're recording this. We are building 16 raised beds. The dirt and compost is there and waiting for us. And they have volunteers coming both from the community, other people that they've known, and also we have an existing congregation in Independence, Kansas. So there's ways of partnership that are going from that. What I love about this, oh my goodness, I love about this one is that this is what it looks like to see church done in, I remember 1,000 new churches in 1,000 new ways. That's what I heard for 20 years in the disciples when we talked about new church. I don't know all the ins and outs of what it is to have a congregation in multiple places and also online and other things like that. Like we're learning it as we go along. We're celebrating that this challenges our existing understanding of what a congregation looks like,
Hmm.
and but it also means that when I said, I'm not going to start a new church in a small town where there already is one, but what if there's somebody who wants to see a new gathering happening and you give space and place, permission for some of the folks in that existing congregation? That's part of what we're doing there as well. So Amy Vanderford is the pastor along with her husband Thaddeus, and their church is called the Laboratory, and it's exciting. I love that we have these opportunities, again, permission giving and really getting to live into where God is calling us.
I know that you are probably aware of the post that came out by Ryan Berge,
Oh yeah,
the religious sociologist, and he looks at a lot of stuff on regarding religion, but he
I'm a
looked at
subscriber. I love them. Yeah.
okay at the they have been called the Seven Sisters of mainline Protestantism, of which the Disciples is one. Um, and he looked at just kind of the time period. I think it was from 1987 till now. Um, and of all of the denominations, we kind of came up with the biggest loss. It was like at 74%. It was a big
Yeah.
loss. What does this type of a ministry, what can it do, or can it do regarding the future of our own denomination? Um, Knowing that, there are a lot of different factors that come into that loss of membership,
Hmm.
and also knowing we're not going to go back to what things were in 1987, but how can we go forward, and move forward in a way that's positive? And I think that's kind of the question that I have, is how can this ministry help in some ways?
Well, I'll speak a little bit of Ryan's work there. Again, his lament for his own church closing.
Mhm.
It shows that it's not Ryan Berge is not the finger pointing and
No.
wagging. How dare you? He's got his own grief within this, and a friend of mine, Lauren Richmond, fellow
Hmm.
podcaster, disciples podcaster there. We've had many a conversation around this, or many of it back and forth around this.
Yeah.
There's certainly some grief that comes along with it, and there are these moments where I look at it and I go, "Oh man." Let me start with this. I did youth ministry for so long, right? I was a youth minister at a couple of churches, and I that's how I came to Kansas, was our camping program. And so I got to know kids, and heck, I got to see kids growing up from all over the state that I hadn't even visited their congregations. In fact, that is a fun part of my job right now, is showing up at a church and going, "Oh, I forgot you're from here, and I haven't seen you since I was your camp counselor 15 years ago. Wow, it's amazing to catch up with them," or something to that effect. Um, but here's what I've noticed about those kids, right? I mean, I say kids, they're in their 30s now. And the ones that I've stayed in touch with, or been connected with on social media or anything like that, I see this grace and compassion. I see the way that they care for their community, the what their vocation is, the things
Mm,
that the groups that they've been involved with, the ways that they care for migrants, the ways that they are serving on boards, reaching out to LGBTQ folks. And there's one way to look at it, like, we failed as a church because we let them go at 18 and we didn't bring have anywhere to bring them back. But I like to think of it as, actually, we succeeded as a church in a lot of ways, because we got some kids to really be compassionate and caring and involved. Where we have the ability to see, new hope within this is, okay, how do we name those things that they're involved in as part of the church? Maybe we've gotten used to not naming this as our vocational call in life. Um, or maybe we've separated it enough, like, this is what you do inside the church on Sunday morning, this is what you do in the rest of your life. Can we name that they come together in a different way? And so that's what I love so much about the new churches specifically, is they are so non-traditional that they're able to reach people who are busy on Sunday mornings, or who they're not sitting back there and going, "Oh my goodness, we don't have this many people gathering every week," but they're recognizing what God's kingdom really looks like in such a holistic way. I tell you, I love that. Can we name that as part of our church? Now, you know, the other part of it, and I'll admit it on tape here. I actually gave Ryan Berge the data for the disciples back in the glory days of Twitter. Rest in peace. He put out a call to say, like, I can't find a lot of data. Does anybody? I guess it's a yearbook, and I don't want to pay $40 a piece for each of them. Does anybody have those numbers? And so I went to the church library, opened them up, and took gave him the data right there. Um, but I've been involved with the disciples for years and years and years, my whole life, minus that year with the Lutherans. They're as gracious and welcoming as they were. I came back to the disciples, and they we as disciples would do this thing where we self-reported. And so we would say we have 1,000 members in our church. Now, we worship around 150 every Sunday. And maybe we have 200 active members or something like that, but we have 1,000 members. And those, let me tell you, as somebody who's had to go through those membership rolls before, you kind of squint and call it, call it good. I think, some of that gets overly emphasized now, because as a global pandemic starts and it's harder to keep track of everybody, we went to the most specific ways to keep track. So we got an accurate count as it became really hard to keep an accurate count. All that to say, the numbers certainly do tell a story. And I don't think that it's not an imbalance. I've witnessed it too. We have shrunk, but that's not the story that I am seeing. I'm seeing those kids that we mentored and that we worked with and that we helped foster in their faith, who are living it out in such holistic ways. I'm seeing people who, are involved in their community because they care about their neighbor. Um, my hope is to be able to bring that back to the church, to bring that back. And while it may be hard in those data points to say, this is what the church, this is every Sunday morning attendance, I still think it speaks volumes as to where God is working in our communities.
So, I know we're getting close to about an hour here, so I do want to kind of wrap things up.
Oh,
But
yeah.
um, where do you see the future of congregational revitalization and new church, not just in Kansas, but maybe throughout the denomination?
Um, I see it as small, but
Hmm.
and again, how do we take those to work together?
Hmm.
Um, you know, new church or the future of church really is going to be collaborative. Um, now, growing up in Tulsa, and I'm a graduate of Phillips Seminary. I'm on the board there as well as the alumni rep. But I had a professor living in Tulsa at Phillips who would say, "I drive past 3 disciples' churches every Sunday morning to get to my disciples' church." Like, that's one of the things that could happen in a bigger town like that, is that, you have options, you have different ways that you can get involved. But he would often say that in a lament of, we didn't interact very well. I live in Wichita. We have several congregations throughout the city and throughout the area within an hour's drive of Wichita. But that idea of collaboration has never been the thing. What I'm witnessing now and what I'm helping to facilitate with a couple of congregations here in Wichita is this idea of, what happens if we work together? Recognizing that we have people who live all over the city. How do we help them to be involved in their neighborhood with their immediate community? And so we're working on a project right now that will get hyper local, in that they'll work with people in their neighborhoods. They'll work with people in their immediate circle, and host a Bible study. Do something to get that going, and we'll also help facilitate a block party. And it gives an opportunity to get to know your neighbor in a good way, but it also gives an opportunity to see where it is that we have some growth. And so instead of somebody having to drive 20 minutes and maybe past a couple of disciples' churches to get to their disciples' church, what would happen if we saw some more local focused gatherings? 10, 15, 20 years ago? Oh man. Because I was there for some of that. That is competition. You can't do that. What happens if they leave our church and go to another church or something like that? Or, it's recognizing that the kingdom of God is bigger than we know. And yet, the way that we make those connections is in those small relational opportunities. Now, we see this happen. I heard somebody who served at a very large, mega church, thousands of people every Sunday, and what he said to our group when I was talking with when we were talking with him, is that everything they do on Sunday morning is working to get people into small groups, because it's in those small groups that you see change, deep relationship, and you really see discipleship happening. I'm hoping to continue that kind of growth right there, in that I don't know that it would be. I mean, I would love it, and I'd be grateful if God calls us to start a mega church here in Kansas or anywhere. Sure. But I'm also very thankful for the ways that God is calling us to reach out in the smaller venues, the ways that God is calling us to see each other. And, I look nowadays at, political climates, the ways that our neighborhoods are built. It's hard to get to know people. Um, some other folks we're working with, and you kind of hear this term thrown around, the epidemic of loneliness. That's a reality that's going on for youth, but also for a lot of people. How do we combat that? By making sure that we've got those deeper personalized relationships. And we're letting people know not just that they're valued by God, they're valued by us as well. Not just on Sunday morning for an hour at a time where we're all staring at one person talking, but for who they are and who God has created them to be. It's an exciting time. It is not easily mapped out. It is going to be experimental. There are going to be failures, but I'm excited about what it looks like.
So people want to have questions and want to know more about what you all are doing. How would they contact you?
Yeah. So kansasdisciples.org, that's our website. You can find my contact info there, but also, I'm on Facebook, Travis Kansas Disciples. Those are the three things you need to know. Um, I'm also, if I'm on social media, personally, it's under McKee TR. Um, I said it the last time I was on something like this. I said, if I can't get McKee TR, I don't want it. And then I lost my Twitter account right after that. So, hey, I'm okay with that. I'm okay recognizing that those things have changed. I'm on Blue Sky, I'm on Threads, and on personal Facebook. But yeah, and I'm excited to talk with folks. Um, you and I were saying how you'd like to see some of this coming around up there in the upper Midwest region. Yes, let's talk about it. Let's see ways that we can do it. We would not be here in Kansas if it weren't for the graciousness of the Kansas City region and the General Church's New Church Ministries. So, how do we pass that along? We got to make sure that we're helping out with it. Um, we're already used to partnership. The Kansas Disciples are also partnering with Nebraska and Kansas City for a tri-regional partnership. And hey, if we can expand that around, again, seeing the kingdom of God working in such big ways through small connections.
Well, Travis, thank you for taking the time to chat. And
Yeah.
definitely, I hope to have you back on sometime in the near future. Maybe we can chat a little bit more.
Hey, I love getting to listen to the podcast, and I'm glad that I wasn't coming on here like arguing with some of the other folks, or back and forth on theirs. No, I've appreciated the work that you do, and I appreciate your voice within our disciples context, but also within the ecumenical context. So thank you.
Thank you so much. So I am thankful to have that conversation with Travis. I'm kind of curious about people who are listening in. What is your denomination doing when it comes to starting or revitalizing, starting new churches or revitalizing existing ones? There's a lot of different things going on in the church world these days. I'd love to hear that. If you're interested, you can send me an email to churchandmain@substack.com. And I will include links just to kind of things to reach Travis if you'd like to talk to him. Also, if you'd like to learn more about the podcast, listen to past episodes, or donate, you can check us out at churchandmain.org. You can also go to churchandmain.substack.com to read related articles. I hope that you would consider subscribing to the podcast on your favorite podcast app, and that you would consider leaving a review. That helps others find the podcast. That is it for this episode of Church and Main. Thank you again for listening. I'm Dennis Sanders, your host. Take care, everyone. Godspeed. and I will see you very soon.